Once again, we believe we have assembled among the most distinguished panels of speakers ever to grace a telecom industry event. Over the next 3 days, you'll be hearing from the leaders of Canada's major telecom carriers, from senior representatives of the major suppliers of equipment powering Canada's communications networks, and from applications and solutions creators that give the networks their raison d'être. Despite 15 years of intense competition, this is an industry with participants that can see their profitability changed overnight by the stroke of a pen. As a result, we believe that it is important for this summit to hear from those that have the greatest influence in Ottawa. We're going to hear from CRTC Chair Conrad von Finkenstein tomorrow, and we're also pleased to welcome back Competition Bureau Chief Sheridan Scott, who will address us on Wednesday. We're going to cover all the bases here over the 3 days: market drivers and new technology, business and consumer services, traditional and non-traditional provider activities, wireless and wireline, the continued evolution of IP, the regulatory issues, the policy issues, all of that. We know that the next 3 days will bring something of interest to each of you, and we hope that you find our presenters to be enlightening, challenging, both stimulating and thought-provoking. We urge you to take advantage of networking opportunities that are afforded by our coffee and meal breaks.
We've tried to present on this stage the most influential leaders affecting the Canadian telecom industry, and in large measure, I think we've succeeded. As Michael said, and Bob McFarlane from TELUS once observed, that nothing can change the profitability of a company in telecommunications, for good or worse, as fast as a regulator. Despite 16 years of facilities-based competition in the telecom industry, the influence of Ottawa and Gatineau is still strong. The past few weeks have seen spectrum policy influence billions of dollars of investment go into thin air, or perhaps I should say broadband air. In the past year, the CRTC has issued decisions affecting hundreds of millions of dollars in capital investment in broadband through the deferral account, Decision 2008-1. Business plans of incumbents and competitors alike are influenced by the outcome of the Essential Services Proceeding, Decision 2008-17. This is a chart that was released about a month ago, generating all sorts of news stories and commentary about how Canada has slipped again in the OECD broadband rankings from number 9 to number 10. As recently as about 5 years ago, we were ranked number 2. I've written a fair bit about this on my blog, noting that we shouldn't be terribly concerned about the fact that Luxembourg has pulled ahead of us in the year 2007. Canadian carriers actually added more broadband connections in the last half of last year than there are people in Luxembourg. Note as well, this chart has connections per 100 people, not connections per 100 households. It's one of these Eurocentric things that the OECD does. Their metric favors countries with smaller households. Canadians should find it comforting that we lead all group of 7 or all G7 countries. What I found to be more useful in the OECD report was the narrative. Yes, I actually read the report for the stories, not the pictures. There's a recommendation in there that I think merits some discussion. That recommendation read, governments providing money to fund broadband rollouts should avoid creating new monopolies. For most of the time that I've been involved in Canadian telecommunications, the approach of government in providing incentives for rural and remote broadband has been to create new monopolies. As I've written on my blog, I'm concerned that this has the effect of picking winners and establishing subsidies to one supplier to the detriment of others. This doesn't seem to me to be sustainable or consistent with a policy favoring greater reliance on market forces. At the CWTA's recent WiMAX forum, I wondered aloud if the root of such programs is a patronizing viewpoint that rural and remote equals impoverished. If it costs more to serve a region, why are we embarrassed about allowing service providers to charge more?
And this strikes at the whole politically charged issue of affordability and what Canadian policy should be vis-a-vis promoting broadband access for all, independent of socioeconomic status. Is it in the nation's interest to ensure access to everyone who wants it? Most would argue yes. And some go further, that it's a right for all Canadians to have broadband connectivity. Others, those that would subscribe to a more classical liberal economic philosophy, would maintain that access to this or that technology isn't a right. It is something that is highly desirable and advantageous, but rights concern things such as freedom from government intrusion, the right to have an independent judiciary, the right of assembly, of protest, etc. There's no right of broadband access, they would argue. There isn't even a right to have phone service. This is something that we have considered desirable, and we've put policies in place to try and achieve that. But a right? Yet given the way Canadian social policy has developed over the last, say, 45 years, there isn't an electable government anywhere on the spectrum in this country that could get away with taking an approach that says, if broadband costs more where you live and you want it, then you pay for it at whatever the cost-based pricing may happen to be. That horse has left the barn. So given that, if we believe that prices are too high for some residents or certain businesses, then it seems to Mark and me that an answer is to provide direct-to-the-user subsidies, perhaps through a tax credit system. This would result in more sustainable, competitive service providers, a portable subsidy and one that targets those who need it, not those who happen to live in this or that area. So once we approach broadband expansion in that manner, we have the benefit of helping all Canadians who are not yet connected. For example, there are many households in urban areas that can't afford to equip their homes with a computer and with connectivity. Shouldn't our connectivity strategy be as concerned with that sort of digital divide? We might find that a direct needs-based subsidy costs less and benefits a broader group of Canadians caught on the wrong side of that divide. It's not just a chasm between rural and urban. At the root is affordability, which is a problem facing lower income dwellers as much as rural markets. At around $4 billion for AWS spectrum that's been raised, the federal treasury has raised about $2 billion more than anyone had been forecasting. So what are we going to do with all this money? Could be used for debt reduction, that's possible. Or, as we all fear, it could disappear down some government program sinkhole. Instead, how about establishing an affordable broadband connectivity solution for all Canadians? That doesn't mean subsidies for all. It doesn't mean picking winners and throwing government money into construction projects. We propose that the government establish a sustainable program that helps lower-income Canadians to pay what it costs to provide service, regardless of means. Our tax system is already structured to be able to afford such subsidies, and there are even mechanisms to differentiate based on geography.
We think that this kind of approach would use the AWS auction windfall to stimulate economic investment in broadband infrastructure by regional and niche service providers. It represents a way for the government to reinvest money generated from the telecommunications industry back into the industry to help bridge the digital divide and render broadband affordability a non-issue. There's been a lot of legislative activity looking at telecom policy in recent weeks. 2 recent private members' bills looked at consumer issues in telecom. A question is, which political party will include universal broadband access as a plank on their next election platform? Our theme for this year's proceedings is maintaining relevance for the customer. A number of years ago, service providers spoke of concerns in being intermediated, in being reduced to bit pipe providers. In an internet era, how do carriers maintain relevance? Conversely, a concern of policymakers and consumers is how do application providers reach customers if traditional carriers control the access? Our program begins with an address from one of the leaders in delivering converged services to end users, wireless and wireline voice, video, broadband. Rogers operates radio and TV stations, publishes magazines, operates a baseball team, and has traditional video stores. I'm going to invite Evan Kelly of PricewaterhouseCoopers to introduce our opening speaker.